Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the Rock Daisy Sports Performance Podcast, where we decode the data, science, and stories powering elite athlete development. I'm Ron McKeefery, and in every episode, I'll be diving deep with top strength conditioning coaches, sports scientists, and performance experts who are driving the game forward using tech, insight, and grit. Welcome to Inside the Numbers, the podcast where we dive deep into the science and strategy behind elite performance. I'm your host, Ron McKeefery, and today's guest is someone who's walked the line between NFL intensity and collegiate innovation. Dustin Plankey is the coordinator of sports science for Maryland football. From his time with the Jaguars to his role in Maryland's Sports Research and Innovation Committee, Dustin brings a data-first, athlete-centered mindset to the game. So let's get into this episode. Dustin, man, really excited that you're on the show. Appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, Coach. Happy to be here.
Take us back, why performance science? Why, you've had a background in athletic training, you've had obviously a background in strength and conditioning, the blend of the two. Talk us through that process.
Yeah, so, did the undergrad in athletic training, already had an EMS certification coming into college. That kind of blended that pretty quickly, and really, really quickly found my way on the rehab side of things. And so really had a passion for performance at that point, really started to see the benefits of that, and was able to cut my teeth at smaller schools of kind of seeing the strength side, blending it with the AT side, and was lucky enough as an intern in 2017 for Jeff Allen at Alabama to get exposed to a NORD board. Clay Keith showed me a little bit of the catapult at the very ground level and was like, hey, this is something that I can see a future in. So it just kind of piqued my interest, right? 2017 piques my interest on, that this stuff can have value on the AT side. It can have value on the strength and conditioning side. And that was really probably that first time that I started to blend strength and AT together and pull it together and say, hey, this is performance. This isn't sports medicine and strength and conditioning, it's performance. And so let's pull the things together. Can the data help us do that? If it can, and that can drive us in the right direction, that was kind of where it all came from. And then I've just been lucky enough along the way to get some people to take a chance on me and give me some opportunities to start to do that.
Jeff obviously is one of the best in the business now, and you've had some really good people around you that have kind of allowed you the freedom, the autonomy to kind of build out this field, because I think it is. I think it's this kind of a unique niche within the two disciplines, but where have you been able to, there's not a textbook, there's not a lot of resources out there right now blending these two disciplines. Like where do you feel like you gain most of your knowledge, and where do you go for additional information?
Yeah, so I think it all starts with this ability to ask really good questions. And so I'm cardinal example of somebody early in my career who I didn't ask good questions. I was just trying to look for some type of solution somewhere, somehow that would answer, the very surface level of what I was looking for. And in my time in Jacksonville, I would sit in Chris Bach was our director of performance science down there, and I would sit in his office, and early in my time, I would sit there and I'd ask these very vague questions, and he would challenge me to really ask better questions. And he wouldn't really answer. He would know what I was trying to get at, but he wouldn't answer it until I understood why I was trying to ask it. What am I trying to get at? What am I trying to figure out? By the end, it's like, hey, I could walk in there and I had a very specific question and I was looking for something very specific. And that's really kind of where it all comes from, is I think, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but, you perform a force plate jump, you get 256 different metrics. You can get lost in this stuff. Absolutely. And without a textbook and all these different articles and everything trying to be research validated at the same time, I think for me, it comes back to really trying to focus on what am I trying to solve? What am I trying to get an answer to? What is my end goal? And what is it that are going to be my constraints to get there? Once I have that information, I can then ask a better question. So whether that's, not to shut out other podcasts, the Pacey podcast is very good. Social media is a big help, being able to connect with other coaches. We have a good staff here that have all been different places and seen different things, but I'm not the greatest at really synthesizing that without a conversation. Yeah. And so for me, wherever I get the information, I then want to talk about it with somebody who didn't provide me access to whatever that was. So Coach, if you gave me, hey, this is a cool article on X, Y, and Z, I may read it and understand it and try and process it and synthesize it down into what I think it means. And then I'm going to take that information and my understanding of it and try and have a conversation about it with somebody else and say, hey, this is what I think I know. These are the questions that I think I got answers to. And then once I've asked those questions and I've had those couple conversations, it really continues to refine that original question. It gets you to an answer that's actually functional and usable for you, as opposed to whatever the abstract and conclusion section of a research article might have been.
Yeah, I think something that you said right there is super important for everybody to take away is not just accepting somebody else's interpretation of that information, right?
100%.
Going straight to the source, or being willing to reach out to this network of people to bounce ideas off of and continue to grow on that information. I think that's the biggest thing for sure.
Absolutely.
You mentioned you came from Jacksonville. You're obviously at high level ball at Maryland as well. But like, what has there been any kind of a difference between working with NFL players when it comes to the performance side of things versus college players?
Yeah, I think if we just call a spade at the NFL level, they always have the right to say they don't want to do it, right? If we're going to try and do our force plate testing on Monday and they say, you know what, not feeling it today, knee bugs me, you know what, you go remind them, hey, a couple times throughout the lift, hey, make sure you come jump. Then all of a sudden the lift ends and you're looking at your sheet and you realize there's 3 guys that didn't jump. There's just not, in most organizations, there's not a high level of repercussion for that. And so, I think at that level, the biggest goal that you have is trying to make sure you can educate them on, what is it that we're looking for? What is it that we're trying to understand? And most importantly, how can this be beneficial to you?
Great.
And so, if you look at the Major League Baseball collective bargaining agreement, one of the things that it says, and I may not be 100% accurate, but it tells you that you cannot track any player on the 40-man roster unless they volunteer for it, right? So if they volunteer to jump on the plates, if you ask them and they say, yeah, they'll jump on the plates. But it's why they don't wear any monitors. It's why they don't do a lot of those things. Because in their world, they're afraid that data is going to be used against them. Absolutely. And so the biggest thing is trying to educate them that the data can be used for you. And so one thing that I think Chris does a great job down there of is none of this is ever going to be punishment for you. Like, we're not going to use this as an excuse for you to not practice. We're not going to use this as an opportunity to take food off of your plate, because every snap that they take at that level is money. And so if they feel as though whatever you're testing, whatever you're evaluating is taking money off of their plate and out of their pocket, they're less likely to do it, and they're less likely to do it with any intensity. And so that was probably the biggest difference there versus here. They don't really get much, for lack of a better explanation, they don't get much of a choice. If we tell them, hey, we're jumping on force plates on Monday, we're going to jump you on force plates on Monday. If we tell you you're going to wear a catapult, you're going to wear a catapult. But here, what we try to do a good job of is make sure that we are testing and evaluating at intervals that make sense and providing feedback for the player that says, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is our action plan for you moving forward, as opposed to the guy that just jumps on the plates every Monday and he gives you his 3 reps and he goes back to his rack and he doesn't ever hear anything about it. There's never a leaderboard. There's never a, hey, these are the performance things we want to work on. And so, when you kind of take that choice and opportunity away from them to say they don't want to do it, I think it's important that you continue to add value back to them. Something I learned early in my career is anytime that you're taking them away from directly getting better at their sport, is they view it as you are taking their time, right? So if you're going to take the 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 30 seconds, however long the test takes, whatever it is that you're doing, you need to make sure that test is actionable and effective at giving them an opportunity to get better at their sport. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I learned there. And one thing that I've continued to carry forward is if you're going to test, have value. But that, again, comes back to the very first thing that we talked about, which is you got to ask a really good question on the front end and make sure that whatever it is that you're trying to answer, the test is actually applicable to that. And you're not just saying, hey, we want to jump on plates, or we want to use the NOR board, or we want to run in a timing gate, just to say that you did it, right? You want to be able to actually provide feedback for the athlete, for the coaching staff, both technical side as well as the strength side, and make sure that you're giving yourself an opportunity to get that individual better and not just take. You got to give something back to them. You can't just take from them.
Yeah, such important points there. I mean, I think no athlete wants to feel like a lab rat, right? They don't want to. They don't have a bunch of things on them, and they definitely don't want information to be used against them. Which is, I've seen that happen at the NFL level. I've been a part of that even, and I think that that's something that is, as NIL and these athletes are getting paid, and eventually wherever college football goes, right? Like the people that have been in both the NFL and college have a unique ability to understand, like, hey, these guys, they don't have to do it, and so the two questions that always come back is like, how's this going to help us win? Or how is this going to help me extend my career? And I think if you can tie it back to those two things, then usually athletes will, they'll buy into it, right? And they'll want to be a part of it. And I think that you doing that is super important. At Maryland, you're part of the Sport Research and Innovation Committee. I thought that was pretty unique, just kind of researching for this episode. This is a committee made up of a lot of different disciplines, a lot of different groups and whatnot. Talk a little bit about maybe a project that you guys have worked on in collaboration that you're proud of, or something that you're working to make this holistic approach within the university.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are working towards, slowly albeit, is kind of blending a kinesiology performance testing lab and how that can be functional for athletics. And so where it kind of all started was, hey, let's have a conversation about if you were to be able to have a lab, right? If you had a lab and you had whatever resources available, what are the things that you would want to use it for? And what are the things that what's the tech that you'd put in it? What are the tests that you would run? How often would you want to use it? And then let's figure out, okay, that's where you are. And then let's figure out where Kinesis is and what are the things that they're looking to supplement because they already have a biomechanics lab on campus. Okay, so if we can try and balance these two things out and you can put it in the football facility because we have some space that's getting finished up, renovated, all that, what are we able to do with that? And what are the projects that we're going to be able to work through? What does staffing look like? What does the equipment need look like? And it's still got time, right? Like we're still very much in the infancy of it. But it's been an interesting look behind the curtain for me of, okay, yes, on the very much, on front lines testing, this is what we would do. And this is the tech that we have, and we have everything that we would need. But okay, let's back this thing up and say, okay, you're fully returning somebody to play. We're evaluating our incoming roster. We're doing whatever we need to do with our players to try and maximize them. Now, would that look any different? Is there any additional information that we would want to have? Is there any additional testing that we could perform in a much more sterile environment that will maybe get us an opportunity that you're not really able to do on the front lines, right? We all know that there's tests that I would like to perform that I can't do in the weight room. When there's 60 guys in the room and the music's bumping and you only have 50 minutes to get them in and out versus, hey, we're going to take you over to the performance lab. You've got a 2:00 appointment today. You're going to be in there for about 45 minutes. We're going to run a couple tests on you, warm you up, get it done, be able to get you out. That is a very different environment than in the weight room. And right. So, that's something that we have had conversations about is how do we blend those things together to make sure that the tests in two very different settings still have the ability to overlap and perform a complete evaluation of who that player might be.
Yeah, I think it's such a, blending the academics, blending the sports medicine staff, the nutrition staff, mental health, all these different high performance disciplines. That's the key. I mean, as we move forward, that's going to be the differentiator for most of these programs, and the people that are doing that well are going to be what the athletes are looking for sure. Now, you guys you mentioned that you have all the tools. I mean, Catapult, Nordboard, C3 Logic, I think, right?
Yep.
How do you decide what technologies to put into the program, and how do you, decipher between the noise of staying up with the Joneses and all the different tools?
So when I got to Maryland, they already had everything, right? They had the full vault suite. They had catapults. We have perch in the racks, which obviously now those fall under the same umbrella. The sports medicine side is deciding what they want. They've got their C3 Logics. They've got a Dynamo over there. So I actually kind of go in the other direction. I very rarely am looking to add to what we have because the standard that piece of technology or equipment has to meet in order for it to be something that provides like real value for me and our program is pretty high, right? So it all, again, I keep coming back to the same concept of like asking a really good question on the front end. And so for me, like we're all trying to decide these like performance indicators, right? We're trying to decide like, does the player have the ability to do it versus can they execute it on the field? Are they strong enough? Are they fast enough? And so for us, I think finding something that outside of really force plates, perch, and GPS that gives us something that we're not getting, we haven't really found ourselves in a position where we feel the need to go add something. When I got here, we actually eliminated some stuff. We kind of altered our testing schedules. We changed the way that we were using our VBT. We adjusted some GPS metrics, and all of that stuff came from the idea of, as you said, we're going to eliminate the noise. So, I mentioned earlier how many metrics you can get from a single force plate jump. You can do the same way on catapult. Like, you can get so many different metrics and so many different things. And it's like, let's narrow this thing down. Let's get this thing really, really simple. And again, I've shouted him out a couple of times already. Chris Bach did a good job of explaining this to me, is be really, really good at whatever those key things are going to be. Really simplify your processes, really understand the data that you're collecting and actioning. And only at that point should you look to add more and change and develop these other technologies and bring those things in. Because if not, you're going to run 15 different tests on 12 different pieces of technology, and you're going to sit there when it's all said and done on this Excel sheet or whatever you're using full of information, and you're not going to have a decision. So what we've done is we've eliminated the noise on the front end, and we've said, okay, these are the pieces of technology that we fundamentally believe in. These are the things that we know that we can action, and to the best of our knowledge and ability, have a direct translation to the field. And so if we feel confidently about those things, okay, then this is what we're going to use. And then from there, it says, okay, they can all produce a ton of information. So what pieces of information from them are effective? Right. And what are the things that you feel like you can action most importantly? And so we've narrowed those things down. We've effectively narrowed our focus to the things that we know that we can make difference on, and based on our experiences, have as close to a direct translation to the field as we can get. And we've spent the last 2 years really doing our best to hone in on those things and be as effective in testing, managing, and developing those qualities as we can. And so, this year we will continue to do that. And if at that point we feel like, hey, we're really good at this, is there something else? Is there another test? Is there another option for us that can add, that can supplement to what we're doing, but doesn't take away from the time and resources that we've invested in these core fundamentals?
Right. So it's so important. I think, especially whenever you take over a new program, it's always the first question that I have is, what can I eliminate to make this more efficient or productive? And not everybody does that. I think the more is better strategy, I think, is easy to get caught up in, but what can we do less is such a mature, patient thing to do. But what are those numbers? What are those numbers that you're tracking, that you look at daily to make those actionable decision-making?
Yes. So they're, for us, probably about as basic as any strength coach and sports scientist has ever really, really looked at. And so for us, it came from this idea of, what are the things that are the most important for them finding success on the field? So in the sport of football, it's the ability to run fast. It's the ability to start and stop, so accels and decels, and it's the ability to repeatedly run fast. So your high-speed running bands, velocity thresholds, whatever it is on those that you want to do. And in those, we break it down into yardages and efforts, because I think those two things both matter. I think for that specific thing, I think people can get lost in, well, we have 300 yards at 70 plus or 75 plus, but you did it on 10 efforts. But in a game, they may have to give you 300 yards, but it's going to be spread over 20 or 30 efforts. And now if you look at it and you say, okay, I have the ability to cover the yardage, but do I have the ability to do it repeatedly? And so for us, that became something that was like, okay, we not only care about the yardage, but we do think the efforts matter as well. So then we sat back and we said, okay, these are the things that we feel like we can track on GPS and we have a pretty good understanding of, and they make sense upstairs to the coaches, and they make sense in that locker room to the players. They're very easy to understand. Okay, well, now let's look at the other side of things, because my job is player health and performance. It's not just player performance. So let's look at the health side. When are our players most commonly injured? When they're running at max velocities, when they're starting and stopping, and when they're repeatedly running at higher velocities, both in yardage and the number of efforts it takes them to cover that yardage. Right. So we then looked at it and we said, well, what matters for performance are these 5 things. And what matters for health are these 5 things, and they're the same. So those are probably the 5 things that matter the most to us. So what we said is, these are the things that we're going to track. Because we can explain it to our players that, like, you know what, you haven't hit your number of excels for this week in training. This is why it matters. So we're going to stimulate you pre-practice, post-practice, in a training session, on a 1080, on a prowler. We're going to get other type of accelerative work because we haven't gotten it. And then the flip side is it also gives us an opportunity to monitor and train load throughout the season. So the example that I like to use on this is, right, we're tracking our running backs and we're making sure that we're at our proper totals on everything. And we come out of a week where, after the game, we're looking at the data from the week and your starting running back has 30% more decels on the week than he's had in the last 5 weeks. And you say, okay, well, what does that mean that we can do? Because if you're just collecting it and you're not doing anything with it, you can't really be effective. And so my goal and our objective, just in general, is I want to affect their number of snaps in practice and in the game as little as possible. Because if you're practicing effectively, you're preparing them for the game. If you're preparing them for the game effectively, giving yourself a good chance to win. So let's dominate our box. Let's control what we can control. If your decelerative totals are high, 30% higher than normal, you've effectively overloaded the eccentric on your lower half. So if we want to prevent any overuse injuries to the best of our ability, then how can we affect his training? Okay, well, you know what? We've got back squats in the program today. You know what? Let's move him to a trap bar and let's do concentric only. Or you can keep him on a straight bar. Let's concentric only deadlift, drop it when you get to the top, reset at the bottom. But because we don't want to completely eliminate the tendon health benefits that eccentrics have, we're going to do that, and we're actually going to stimulate you with some isos, right? We're going to get some lower half isos in so that we can continue to maintain tendon health, but we can offload some of that eccentric overload that you've gotten over the last 7 days. So now we've taken the data that we've gotten from the field. We've looked at it and said the ability to decelerate often is going to be important for you, but you've done it a lot more than you normally would. So that's also now going to be an injury risk factor for us. So how can we continue to train you and get you healthy and make sure that you're as prepared as you can be, but not completely avoid that system? Because I think where people get caught a little bit is they'll say, you know what, whatever metric you're using is elevated and it's above whatever your threshold is that you've determined to be your threshold for abnormal values. And you say, okay, well, we're going to rest him today. Why? I mean, what about that value being elevated means he shouldn't do anything? Right. What about that value being elevated means that guy needs the day off? How about because his repeat high-speed running values are high? Maybe we just minimize how often he's running a full route or full covering a special team. Does that give us the opportunity for that guy to still practice, but reduce the load in terms of what we're concerned about? You see it oftentimes with people who get concerned about total volume numbers, right? Total volume number gets really high. Well, we're going to cut him in half in practice today. But all his intensity metrics were right where you would want him to be. So now we're going to cut his total volume in half, and we're going to cut all our intensity metrics. So when you put him back on the field the next day, now both things are going to spike. You're not giving the athlete as good of a chance to succeed as you could. Do we have an opportunity to reduce total volume, but continue to get some high-intensity stimulus? So all of this to say, these are the metrics that we feel like matter, and that's how we kind of tie them into both training and on-field performance to give that kid the best chance to go do what it is that at this point that we're paying him to do.
I think that's the fear for most people, right? When they start talking sports science and performance science in general, where they think that they're looking for a reason out of things, and to me, the data and the tools help you really reinforce what you can do at a high level and just be able to be a little bit smarter with with how you go about doing it, and I know that you've used Catapult in a lot of your GPS to really hone in on the amount of running, the structure, I should say, of the running and conditioning program in the summer and then into training camp in the season. How did you go about, how are you going about that process to be able, to really determine what those things are, and then how do you communicate that to the head coach or the director of strength and conditioning or the director of sports medicine to be able to really to keep that culture at a high level where somebody's running their tail off and they look over and they see somebody on a bike?
Yeah, so I think for us, it comes back to if the metrics that you're going to monitor in the season should be the same metrics that you're going to train to in the off season. Okay. So when we look at our off season training, we basically do a worst case scenario model. So we look at the worst time of the year for them in terms of overall load, which for us is generally the middle of fall camp, right? It's not the first week because we never start them on a full week. It's not the last week because you've started to offload them a little bit to get them ready for the season. So we're basically going to look at, in the worst 7-day stretch of camp, what is the expectation that you're going to have to do in all of our volume and intensity metrics? If that's where we know we need to be, then that kind of becomes our standard bearer for what we're going to try and get to. And like anything in programming, you're never going to be perfect. You're not going to knock them all out of the park. And for whatever reason, you may not get to all of them. But what we're going to do through summer training is I'm going to sit at the table when we're putting the program together, and I'm going to tell Coach Davis and the whole staff, this is the number that we feel like they need to be able to get to based on historical data using, Coach Locks has been, this is year 7. We have a pretty good idea what his camp's going to look like. So based on that data, in terms of high speed running, accels, decels, and practice density, this is what we would expect them to need to be able to sustain. So we then look at the summer program and we say, okay, what is the week that we want to be the heaviest week of training? You guys tell me. I'm going to let you make that decision. And if you tell me it's week 6 of 8, then okay, in week 6, this is our goal. We're going to go slightly above, somewhere in that 105, maybe 110% range, depending on the metric and whatever that total value ends up being. And we're going to say, that's our goal for that week. And then what you do, in my opinion, is you go back and you look at the first week and you say, okay, where did we end them in the spring? What is a number that we feel is a pretty safe and effective number that they're going to be able to handle coming back from? And then, again, if you're doing it in week 6, you know what week 1 is and you know what week 6 is. This is a pretty standard system at this point. Just progressively overload them with a little bit of undulation to get to whatever that overload is. And then from that point, if you have 2 weeks left, then we can use all of the things that the textbook has taught us, which is your detraining effects on conditioning, what you need to do from an anaerobic and aerobic standpoint. What's your sprint detraining? Do you need to continue? What are the things that you need to continue to hit? And then if there was something that you didn't quite get to in those 6 weeks, you start to work it in there. And so that's basically the blueprint of, hey, this is the general idea. These are the metrics that we want to try and get to this summer. At this point, the ball's in your court. I don't care how you get the accels. I just want to make sure we get close to them, if not get above it. I don't care what your sprint day looks like. If you want my opinion, I'll give it. But what I'm going to tell you is this is how much in general they're going to need to be able to handle. And so in our experience, what we've found is it tends to lend itself more to the intense side of running as opposed to the overall volume. Because when you look at those intensity metrics, if you're hitting those things in training, you're getting to a high enough level of the overall volume that you're finding yourself in a pretty good place. And then we just look at density. So we switch kind of this idea of overall volume into practice density. So if we know on a per minute basis, what are the things that you're going to need to be able to do in camp, that gives us at least a starting point of where we want to get to. Now, in transparency, that's the thing that we're fiddling with the most because it doesn't have the same carryover. There's much more walking time in camp. There's much more standing time. Practices are much longer. But the thought process here is that it gives you an opportunity to say, I only get 6 hours in the summer. I only get 6 because 2 hours are going to go to football. So I'm only going to get 6 or 7. I can't match the volume of 20 hours. There's no way. We're going to be a cross country team. So I don't get that opportunity. But what I can't do is miss out on the 5 key things that we just said cause injury and are going to be our biggest indicators of performance. If those things are true, if you've done a good job asking yourself those questions, those are the things that you then go attack. And what you end up finding is that if you train those effectively and you optimize your work to rest ratios and you kind of manipulate that stuff and, however you decide to manage it, what you end up finding is that the density in which you have to train becomes the volume. Right. And it kind of begins to check that volume box. And we won't get into how Catapult actually calculates player load, but what you would find is when you break it down into the density version of player load as player load per minute, you end up as close to checking the volume box as you can without actually going and running all that distance by continually attacking those intensity metrics. And so that's really like the methodology in which the way that we got there. And we said, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And what you find is it actually saves you time on the field. if you're going to run, an extended series of tempos or 110s or crossfields, you can do that as long as you make sure that you're checking the box that these are the metrics we want to make sure we satisfy within it. So how do we present it? In our Power BI spreadsheets that we use, it's a simple gauge, right? And so each week the gauge adjusts to whatever your total number for that group needs to be. It shows you how close throughout the week. And we basically do a check-in on Wednesday. And we say, okay, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we've trained. We've trained and we've run. This is where we are. We have 48 hours left in the week. This is what's left to fill. And then it gives you the opportunity in the last 2 days of the week to say, can we stick with the original plan? Are we comfortable backing off the original plan because we've already met what they need to get to? Or, you know what, guys, they didn't attack the first half of the week the right way, or weather caused you to shift, or something happened in the first half of the week. We kind of got to mash the gas this last half in terms of what we're going to get done. And that can shape itself however you want. If you need to cut an accessory block off your lift because you need to spend an extra 15 minutes on the field, then that's what you do. Or vice versa. If it's like, hey, we've met a lot of our running objectives. Okay, is there anything in the room that we can add? Like, is there anything else that we're seeing from the guys that we can supplement in to make sure that we're really not missing anything now that the big rocks have been put in the jar per se?
Yeah, you just answered my follow-up question there, which I think is excellent. I know for me, when I first started using GPS data to kind of reverse engineer our volume, our intensity throughout the week for our training, all of a sudden you look up and you're like, okay, freaking 110s, my offensive lineman already tapped out of every metric, for the week.
Yeah.
And I really had a hard time reconciling how do I do what I know needs to be done to prepare a team mentally with the data, and
100%.
And so what you just said there, I think, is the answer to that question of what else.
So to that, whether or not you like or don't like stadiums, if your head coach comes to you and says, hey, I want to make sure we run stadiums, then when you plot your week out, you need to just know that, yeah, we're going to run on the 5th day, but it's not going to get us a single thing of what we're looking for other than the mental side of it, right, which is the side that none of this tech can capture. Great. So then okay, well, I really have 4 days that I need to try and get these objectives on GPS. Because on the 5th day, because we're running, we're going to get something, but we're not going to get any of the things that we're looking for. But you are checking another box that I think a lot of people on the sports science side can miss, and that is the mental side of working as a team, fighting through some adversity, and just accepting that just because something doesn't exactly check a catapult box, it doesn't exactly match what the science of it says, there's another element of this game, and that's the ability to work as a team play the game. Yeah. And so what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to sit here and tell you, you know what, we really shouldn't run stadiums because it's not checking this box. Well, you can still get two things can be true.
Right. Right. I think that's such an important, especially for all the young sports scientists that are listening. I think what you just said with not saying you can't do something, like no head coach, no head director of strength and conditioning, nobody wants to hear what they can't do. A better question and a better way to put that, I think, oftentimes is at what expense? Like if we continue to do this, like at what expense does that happen? Does that take from our team or from your training or from your program? And those guys are smart dudes. Coaches are smart people. Like, if you can frame it in the right way, oftentimes they'll arrive at the same conclusion. It might take them a minute, but they're going to arrive at the same conclusion. So I thought that was great, man. Well, we end the show with some quick, just kind of one hitters here. So what's one piece of tech that you couldn't do your job without? Yeah, I agree. What's one thing in sports science that's overrated?
Programming. Software programming. Not the ability to write a strength program, software program.
What's one thing that's underrated?
Relationships. 100%. It's a relationships game.
Agreed. Best book, podcast, or paper you've read recently that shaped your thinking?
Altus Need for Speed. It was a Altus course that they offered. I did it, I don't know, probably 18 months ago now, and it still influences what I do suggest, monitor to this day.
They do a fantastic job. Who's someone in this field you admire and think more people should know about?
Christopher Bach, Director of Performance Science, Jacksonville Jaguars. Absolutely shaped my career. Would not be here without him.
Yeah, I knew you'd say him. I think he's obviously had a huge influence for sure. Man, hey, this has been freaking incredible. I really appreciate you doing this and sharing and being an open
Yeah.
book. If people wanted to continue to ask you questions or follow up or learn more about what you're doing in the performance science space, how could they stay up with you?
Yeah, so I'm actually not on socials. Noticed my screen time was really high and said, you know what, we're probably good here. Plankey D, PLANKEYD at umd.edu. Just shoot me an email. I've got it on my phone. I'll see it. And then obviously, not going to broadcast my phone number to the masses, but I'm more than happy to get on a call and chat with anybody, text with anybody. But just shoot me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can.
So, man, appreciate you, buddy.
Absolutely. Have a good one.